How do you feel when you are interviewed yourself?
Hi Tiziana, buonasera. I hope you're very well. Great to see you. Hello. Yes, the question about the interviews. I've always given lots of interviews about exhibitions, of course, whenever I curate exhibitions. It's all been gathered in the book, what you always wanted to know about curating, but in there to ask. And in a way, I think it's always been a very useful way of also writing about exhibitions. Because very often, obviously, with an exhibition, there is a preface, there is an a priori statement, right, which happens in the process of making the show and is then published in the catalog. But very often the writing happens before the show. So interviews are a great possibility to reflect upon the exhibition, and particularly with exhibitions like Cities on the Move, or more recently Strolls with Van Palace in Swiss Pavilion in Venice, which are laboratory exhibitions, exhibitions which evolve, exhibitions which change. Obviously, we can only say very few things at the beginning, and the main things happen actually during the exhibition. So yeah, interviews have always been a possibility to actually, reflect upon exhibitions and further continue to write them.
Years ago, I remember you referring to the fly-in, fly-out opportunity granted by globalization and low-cost flights. Artists and curators felt all electrified by the possibility to curate exhibitions and present their work globally. Finally, we seem to have reached the possibility to handle the complexity of the world. Now, we are not that excited anymore. We are now aware that in order to deeply understand a culture, a country, the 2 or 3 days of an exhibition opening are not sufficient. We also know that it is not possible to handle the multitude of the globe, to grab it onto our hands. The world has revealed itself to be much bigger and complex than we could ever imagine. In recent years, even the word international has been often replaced by transcultural. How has your profession changed in the course of the years in the light of this awareness?
I've never really used this notion of fly in, fly out curating as something positive. I actually always from the very outset thought that it's a huge problem, with curating if there is not a sustained kind of presence of an exhibition. So I would say, in a way, I've always believed with exhibitions, and it's something I believe more than ever before, that it's about what Fernand Braudel calls la longue durée. It's about a way how we can actually do exhibitions which evolve over a long time. Almost, you write a novel, it can take a long time, it can take many years to write a novel, and very often time frames we are given to do exhibitions are very short, 6 months or a year to do a biennale or to do a large scale exhibition is nothing compared to the research it takes. So that's why I've come up with this methodology, one can say, that very often I work on a don't stop principle, exhibitions which are complex dynamic systems, which evolve in an almost cybernetic way with feedback loops, kind of exhibitions which learn, no learning systems. And so I would say Do It, for example, has been going on now for 21 years and has happened in more than 100 cities, and it's an exhibition which each time writes another chapter and each time learns from the context where it takes place. And I would say in this sense, what certainly has become more important over the last years is also this idea of again creating a connection, because obviously what lacks in a kind of a fly in, fly out situation is connection. And Dorothea von Hantelmann has just written this wonderful book, The Exhibition as a Ritual, which we presented as part of this year's Venice Architecture Biennale in the Swiss Pavilion, in the Strolls Van Palace, the project on Cedric Price and Lucius Burkhardt. And Dorothea presented every day during the opening days vignettes, chapters out of these books. And one point which I thought was particularly interesting was her reference to Margaret Mead, the great American anthropologist. And Margaret Mead always lamented this lack of exhibitions in terms of a connection. She said exhibitions, in a way, only appeal to the visual sense. If we compare them to rituals as they happen in Bali or even medieval masses, which appeal to all the senses, the exhibition is really in deficit. Now, obviously, the exhibition brings us a lot of advantages. The exhibition is an ultimately very liberal ritual. It's a format which allows us to be visited for a minute or for a year. The viewer can decide how long he or she spends with the exhibition. We can return also to the exhibition. One thing I think which is also important is that it's an individualistic ritual. It's not this idea. It's not this idea that basically we have one person communicating to the masses. It's a more individual situation, but for everyone, where we can have a one-to-one relationship to the work. But obviously that doesn't necessarily mean connection, as Margaret Mead shows. And the fact that actually visitors spend very short time, or very little time, that's the word in English I think, very little time in front of an artwork, on average 10-15 seconds, shows us that she's right with this lack of connection. So I think it's interesting to reflect upon the fact how we can make more local connections, more global connections. And I think the great writer for this, the great inspiration, is Edouard Glissant, a writer who unfortunately still has not been translated into English and Italian and Spanish and all languages of the world sufficiently, because he should be translated in every language in the world. He's a writer who, from Martinique, lived and worked between geographies, the last years of his life mainly between Paris and New York City, and of course with very regular stays in Martinique. And Edouard Glissant has not only been instrumental in this idea of blending cultures, in this idea of creolization, which is such an important notion for the 21st century, but he's also coined such notions as the archipelago, the important that we get away kind of from a homogenizing continental logic and sort of embrace this idea of the archipelago. And there is a great quote by Edouard Glissant, which I often quote. The American archipelagos are extremely important, says Edouard Glissant, because it was in these islands that the idea of creolization, that is the blend of cultures, was most brilliantly fulfilled. Continents reject mixings, whereas archipelagic thought makes it possible to say that neither each person's identity nor the collective identity are fixed and established once and for all. I can change through exchange with the other without losing or diluting my sense of the self. And this is actually, as says Glissant, what the archipelagic thought and the archipelagic principle of islands teaches us, as opposed to the continental logic. Glissant also coined another very important term, which is mondialité, which I think is particularly important in relation to your question of an ever-increased importance of the local, of connection. This whole idea of mondialité, in La Cohue du Lamentin, he describes wonderfully this idea of a connection to a rock of his childhood, and that's something which Cavavi always said in a wonderful way, that we would always carry the place of the childhood with us. He would always carry Alexandria with him. So I think in a way Glissant's La Cohue du Lamentin is exactly that spot. But he shows us in Mondialité that we live in a situation of globalization, and this is not the first time that the world is in a situation of globalization. We have globalization during the time of the Romans, we have globalization in all kinds of earlier millenniums and centuries, but this 21st century is certainly one of the most extreme, if not violent, moments of globalization, and that leads us to many challenges. One obviously is that there is a danger that in this extreme form of globalization, homogenizing forces lead to a disappearance of difference, and that would mean that the world gets poorer. It leads to extinction also. We're working with Gustav Metzger, I'm going to talk about this later, on the extinction marathon for the Serpentine Gallery for next week, and it leads to the disappearance of diversity on this planet, and obviously, as Glissant says, needs to be rejected, needs to be resisted. We need to resist the homogenizing forces of globalization, which result from us embracing these forces of globalization too blindly. Glissant says, on the other hand, there is another danger, and the danger is not only to blindly embrace these forces of globalization, but to actually categorically reject them, which leads us to new forms of nationalism, new forms of refusal of a global dialogue. Nationalisms as we can observe them right now in a very threatening way in big parts of Europe. So Glissant says that neither of these two paths is a solution, neither the embracing of blind embracing of globalization and homogenization, nor actually this absolute rejection of a global dialogue. He says, as he says here in his reference to the island, that I can change through the exchange with the other without losing or diluting my sense of self. And that is what leads us to mondialité, a word which is difficult to translate into English. One could maybe call it globality. It differs widely from globalization, because this idea of globality or mondialité is a dialogue which enters the global. It's not a refusal, it's actually an engaging with the global dialogue, but always in a way that produces difference. So it's a global dialogue which resists the annihilation of difference. And this is for me the key question as a curator every day. How can we do exhibitions which are exhibitions of mondialité, exhibitions which enhance and produce difference? And this is one of my many rituals. I believe, as Tarkovsky said, we need more rituals in the 21st century, and one of my many rituals is to read Edouard Glissant every morning for 50 minutes. I would never start the day without Edouard Glissant.